Hello and welcome to another episode of Angel Insights. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by one of the Axis Fund portfolio companies, the founder and CEO of Wild Hydrogen, James Milner. James, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I'm really looking forward to a chat.
So the business we're talking about today, of course, is Wild Hydrogen. Um,
Absolutely.
for those that don't know Wild Hydrogen, you're looking to produce green hydrogen in a very natural process. Take us through kind of where the idea for the business came, and then we'll get into kind of the ins and outs of how you actually do what you do.
Yeah, sure. So the idea was born by our inventor and now CTO, Mark, who's my co-founder. And he's been working 40 years in the gasification industry, first with coal and then with biogenic material, really to get the holy grail, which is making a hydrogen or a hydrogen-rich syngas from waste materials and with a view to replacing fossil fuels eventually. And so, having spent all that time in that industry, Mark realized that there could be another way of doing it. And he literally woke up one morning with a new idea. And he'd had that idea in his head for a few years. As I say, I met him when I'd retired, and he was my neighbor. And we got chatting over a cup of coffee at our coffee shop. And 2.5 hours later, we decided, let's go for it. And I literally came out of retirement. I left my lovely partner Karen running the business and building shepherd's huts. And I came with Mark, based in our kitchen first of all, to really look at this tech that he'd got and see whether it would fly. We thought it would. We took it to some angels. We took it to yourself, Tom, and to SyndicateRooms, literally with a PowerPoint. And that was 2 years ago. And now we're in an industrial unit in Gloucester with 4 prototypes and proven tech under our belt, and on our third seed round. And so it's been quite a journey. Yeah.
So for those that are less aware of kind of the hydrogen rush, if you will, obviously everyone's looking for cleaner, renewable sources of energy. What is it that sets hydrogen apart from the other alternatives? So, solar and wind and and tidal and such. What is it that gives hydrogen an edge over them, and what are some of the setbacks of hydrogen as well?
I mean, hydrogen as a form of energy is really useful. It's very dense in terms of its energy per kilogram, but it's also very light, and which means that it's quite difficult to store and to capture and it also very reactive. So it just constantly wants to react. It wants to make water. It wants to make other molecules and other compounds. And so it's a very difficult gas to work with, but it's the most abundant um, element in the universe by far. It's been around since the Big Bang, but to capture it and store it and use it on our planet that's a tricky challenge. There's lots of companies out there attempting to do it. The nice thing about it is that when you use it and burn it, all it produces in terms of emissions is water vapor. So it just makes water after you've burned hydrogen. And so
Hydrogen. Sorry,
it's a fantastic, energy replacement for fossil fuels. So we see it really as essential in a non-fossil fuel future, an
fantastic.
essential component. And it's not to replace solar or wind. It's really there to work alongside that. So where solar and wind can't work for various industries or various energy needs, then hydrogen is an obvious replacement to natural gas or to other fossil fuels.
Two points to tap into on that. I appreciate that some of the big players in the auto industry um, have they were working on hydrogen as late 1990s, early 2000s. I used to be a car buff like a long time ago,
Yeah.
and I remember going to the LA Auto Show circa 2000, 2001, and it was BMW had a 7 Series. They just come out with their new 7 Series, and they had a hydrogen version of that. And then it kind of disappeared. And we saw this wave of electric vehicles starting to come in maybe 10 years later, sort of Tesla-ish, with batteries and other not. And hydrogen seems to have been shelved. However, the news in the auto industry now is that some of the bigger players are slowing down on the electric side and revisiting hydrogen.
Yeah.
What do you think's changed, or what happened to put it on hold, and what's changed to kind of bring it back? Because I have this feeling that most cars in the future are more likely to be hydrogen than electric, but maybe I've got a wrong assumption on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And hydrogen has been one of these that's been up and down the hype cycle over many decades. I think everyone realizes, as I say, it's a great source of energy, and it's with no emissions. And the challenge, I guess, when you look at just the automotive industry, and that's only one component, obviously, of energy use, then is, how do you make hydrogen safe? How do you make it compressed enough? You've got to get it to 700 bars, so 700 atmospheres, and store that in a car, in a tank, and then have a hydrogen fuel cell that's converting that hydrogen into electricity, which then either charges batteries or runs a motor. And so that's the technology that the car manufacturers have been working with and exploring and doing lots of innovation around. The Toyota Myra, is an established vehicle. It's not got huge penetration in Europe. It does have in the Far East and in America, specifically in California. But we're not seeing that penetration yet in the UK. In fact, the hydrogen filling stations, of which there was somewhere between, under 10, let's say, they're actually closing them now.
Oh, wow.
But then there's talks about reopening them, a few for buses and heavy transport. So it's a complex area. And, I think if you look at, is it hydrogen versus battery for automotive, it's going to be both, and it's exactly the same as we've got now in terms of diesel and petrol. There's never going to be, I think, one answer. Hydrogen's well suited to those vehicles that need a lot of energy, and that where a battery pack would be too heavy. And you get a law of diminishing returns. If you have a truck, for example, that's very heavy, you'll need a very large battery, or you would have to be charging very regularly in order to make that truck efficient and economically viable for the road. So it's an interesting industry. BMW are now announced just weeks ago, actually, that they're re-looking at hydrogen. And I think that's probably on the back of, an understanding that there isn't enough electricity infrastructure to support 100% electric vehicles on the road. And then, as I say, there need to be this mixed economy. I think the other point to add is that there's been quite a lot of innovation and I'm not sure whether BMW are pursuing this, in terms of internal combustion engines running on hydrogen. So it's a different technology. It's not fuel cell, but it's actually effectively converting a diesel engine into a hydrogen gas engine. And that's really interesting when we look at that. There's been a lot of
fitting these vehicles to be able to use both.
Yes, and sort of revisiting the internal combustion engine concept and looking at hydrogen and how, and there's various challenges around that, which I won't go into all of them, but no. It's interesting. And a couple of companies seem to have cracked that. I think they're now working on making it as efficient as possible. But certainly the technology's out there for an internal combustion hydrogen engine.
And I mean, obviously we won't go into all of the different channels, but you mentioned that transportation is just one of the factors. Of course, the government has announced plans to start testing for boilers, for gas boilers that can run on a blend of both in certain areas where it'll be, I think it's to start 5% hydrogen and the rest natural gas, or it might be 10%. Do you think that's taking off in the right way to go with it, or is there an alternative way to use hydrogen for heating in homes?
I think heating in homes is, again, interesting. I think we're at the embryonic stage of understanding how we would go about doing that and how the boiler manufacturers can make it safe, how we can make it efficient. Can we make it an energy source that's at similar prices to the fossil fuel energy? And that's one of the reasons that we exist, is because we think that we've got a way of making hydrogen that's significantly cheaper than the alternative green hydrogen using electrolysis. But certainly using the gas network and blending into the gas network at the right price point and with the right quality of gas on the paper seems to make a lot of sense. we're just starting to explore now with various regional utilities and gas networks about the practicalities. So how would you go about getting hydrogen in there? What sort of level of purity would you need? Where would we site these? The gas network is not like the electricity network. You can't just plug it in. You've got to be doing it in the right place at the right time and with the right blend. And all of these things have to be worked through. Now, the government have given the green light to have a hydrogen blend up to 20% actually in the network, and looking to start that in 2026. Now, that for us as a hydrogen manufacturer, then that's music to our ears, because if this does work, then it takes away the hydrogen transport issue, which is considerable.
But the if is the big question. And of course, the opportunity is massive. Talk to me a little bit more about the business itself and a little bit about the technology, because you mentioned there's some pretty big players and competitors in the market, but you're doing something in a very unique way. So take us through that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll start by just saying what the elephant in the room is really with hydrogen. And the elephant in the room is that everyone realizes it's a fantastic replacement for fossil fuels. But the way we're making it at the moment is from fossil fuels. So, there's $100 billion market in hydrogen at the moment. It's mainly used by petrochemical firms for cracking petrochemicals and also for making fertilizer. And that market is using what's known as grey hydrogen, which is, as I say, from fossil fuels, from coal and from natural gas. And it's very cheap, but it's very expensive for the planet. So the whole of the hydrogen industry at the moment, the estimate is that that's releasing 700 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. That's almost 3 times UK's full carbon footprint. And so, everyone recognizes that hydrogen is a fuel of the future, but it's currently, in terms of solving climate change, but it's currently one of the largest polluters in terms of the amount of CO2 per kilowatt hour of energy. So that therefore has led to, quite a meteoric rise in the pursuit of an alternative method of making hydrogen. And electrolysis is a way of doing that. So taking water and splitting it into hydrogen and oxygen by running an electric current through it is green hydrogen. If you're using the electricity from solar and wind. Yeah. And the issue is, the elephant in the room is, yes, that's a great way, and it's certainly got a reduced footprint because you're just using solar and wind, but it's extremely expensive. And there's some laws of physics that can't really be broken around this, in that you need more energy to split, more electricity and electrical energy to split that water than you get from the hydrogen that you release. So roughly 50 kilowatt hours per kilogram to create 1 kilogram of hydrogen, and 1 kilogram of hydrogen is about 30 kilowatt hours of energy. So you have to put in more energy in order to make that hydrogen. So electricity energy storage, yes, you can see that there's definitely a market there for that. But in terms of an alternative to fossil fuels, until we have excess capacity, wind and solar, considerable excess, then it's difficult to understand how we could get to a price point that's equivalent to the current grey hydrogen using that method. And I wanted to explain all that, and so that you can see where we've got a gap. There's a gap in the market, which is for price competitive hydrogen at low or even carbon negative emissions, and that's the USP that we feel our tech creates.
Very cool. And if we can talk a little bit about where the business is at, because we invested almost 2 years ago, and then I knew you were building a very small kind of prototype to demonstrator to show the technology worked. And for Christmas, not this year, but the year before, you sent some lovely little I don't want to say vials, because that underestimates it, of what you'd actually produced. And then you were going on to build this bigger demonstrator. Where's the business at right now, and kind of what are the next steps for it?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Tom. I mean, on our first seed round, we were challenged by our investors to make hydrogen by Christmas. So we were determined to do that with our prototype. And it was the first of its kind in the world. to produce hydrogen in this method from biogenic material. And we were so proud of that moment. It was literally the 22nd of December. And we thought, let's post these out to our investors. So we did get a little vial of hydrogen off to each of our investors to prove that. And that really cemented us and proved to the investors that we had a technology that was going to be useful in this area. And that really kickstarted the business into its second year growth phase. And on the back of that, we did our second seed raise, which was oversubscribed actually, which was fantastic. And that enabled us to build a series of additional prototypes. So we're now on prototype number 4, which we're very proud of. It's got a nickname of Mini, even though it is very large. It's 3 meters by 3 meters. It's a big piece. We've definitely come out of the lab and we've scaled up. This is, for those listeners who are familiar, at a technology readiness level of 6. So NASA have developed a concept of technology readiness levels as part of the moon landings, actually. And we're moving up those TRLs with an ambition to get to TRL 8 within the next 3 years. And beyond that, it's into commercial reality and producing energy power plants, producing hydrogen from the biogenic waste. So we're at that very exciting part of our business where we've got proven tech under our belt. We're looking for new investors to come in. We're looking for industrial partners to join us on our journey. So hydrogen off-takers and also feedstock partners. And we've secured a site to build what we're calling a commercial demonstrator, which will be a 0.5 megawatt to 1 megawatt in scale. And that's a 3-year program that we've planned out starting next year. And we're growing, and it's a super exciting place to come into work. And I'm so proud of the team and what we've achieved in the small time that we've had to get to this point.
Very nice. Yeah, I mean, obviously you're going back to the broader market, and you talked about the team a little bit. You compete against some massive players. I mean, some of the biggest fossil fuels companies are focused on hydrogen as one of their replacing and phasing out the old, bringing in the new. How are you able to compete with these firms that have billions to put into it, on both from the tech perspective, but also recruiting the team, because you have a fantastically smart team, and you've managed to get some great people. I don't mean to guess what you're paying them, but I could assume that had they gone to work for a Shell or a BP or whoever, they'd probably get a fair bit more. So what's drawing them to the business, and how do you keep them around?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And the last 2 years, we're still small. So, we're just tens of people, but we punch above our weight. And being able to be flexible, fleet of foot, being able to bring sort of agile engineering development, practical engineering development with prototypes to play with our in-house engineering partners has meant that it's a really exciting place to work. And that's part of my job, is to create that culture. And it's a collegiate atmosphere. It's very flat structure. We've attracted a lot of, some of the best in the world in terms of scientists and engineers that sit on our board, and then a very bright and clever young team. And you know what? It's not pay. It's not pay at all. And it's all about the difference that every day, as we get closer to this, breaking down each engineering challenge and closer to a technology that could really revolutionize the energy industry. That's what's keeping our young team motivated. And Tom, it's restored my faith in young people, I've got to tell you. So, where we have these young grads and PhD students coming on board, they're passionate about the planet, they're passionate about the tech. And, our mantra really is, well, look, if we succeed with this and we can make some money, we can plow that money back into the tech, and we can scale up, and we can make more difference. And that's what's motivating. And it's really refreshing.
I mean, it sounds too good to be true. You've got 14 world-saving problem that you're trying to tackle. What's the catch?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question all of our investors ask us. You sound way too good to be true, James. This tech you're saying is going to revolutionize the energy industry. The catch is that, as I mentioned, we're at a TRL 6. which means that we're halfway there, if you like, in terms of scale up and in terms of understanding how this technology, we could commercialize it. And so we have a number of small engineering challenges ahead of us. I would say the toughest nut to crack we've done, and the largest engineering challenge in terms of proving this alternative method of extracting hydrogen from biogenic material, that's proven. That core technology is there. We've got the patent on it, and we're very, very protective of it because of the reasons you mentioned earlier. And so what's left is, can we scale up? Can we get to a point where we're making hydrogen in sufficient quantities to support, an industrial off-taker? And that, as I say, is a 3-year program that we're just embarking on now. And for our investors, that doesn't come without risk. So we still know that there's going to be some unknown unknowns, to quote a famous American politician, but we know they'll exist. And part of my job is to get a team together that is, hungry to tackle those, and we have the ability to do that. And I'll just add to the point that it's not just our small internal team. We've managed to create a sort of ecosystem of engineering partners and also feedstock partners that are part of our development. And we've come across a series of resources that exist in the UK called catapults. And I didn't know these guys existed, and they are fantastic. So we're working with two of the best ones. So the Manufacturing Technology Catapult, based out of Warwick, we've literally just started with them this year, and the National Composite Centre, based in Bristol. These are fantastic engineering resources where, it's state of the art, it's cutting edge, it's leading technology in the world, and it's happening in the UK. And I'm so excited, being an engineer, that this still exists and it's out there. And they've set themselves up brilliantly to help small tech startups. And it's about and it's about working at pace and joining the team and collaboratively, being part of the project. And that's been a fantastic resource for us to pull on and instrumental in getting us to where we are at such a quick pace.
Now, the catapults, so for anyone listening who isn't aware, I think there's 7 or 8 now, and they're all quite themed. We've dealt with a couple of them, including the Digital Catapult, which is London-based, and then the Space Tech Catapult, which is just outside of Oxford. I went for a visit there and it was well over my head, most of the things they were working on, but it was fantastic. You've mentioned something twice now, and sorry for being a little bit naive, but obviously there's a process that you have, and you take feedstock, which is primarily waste, and you've mentioned feedstock providers. So what is the waste that you're taking and putting into the system that's ultimately going through the electrolysis and producing hydrogen?
Yeah. So what separates us from our competitors, one of the things that separates us from our competitors, is that we can process waste that others can't. So we reach those areas of waste that others struggle with. And what do I mean by that? Well, anything really that's got a hydrogen component to it. So any hydrocarbon, so that could be plastic waste, it could be a wood waste from the logging industry or for the timber industry. It could be what's known as agro residue. So this is all the bits of the agricultural food and farming that can't be used. And there's a market. Well, we can take that feedstock and actually make hydrogen with it. The thing that separates us from others is that we can take wet feedstock. So typically, when you're looking at gasification of biogenic material, you're needing to dry in the feedstock and chop it up into tiny pieces and then gasify on a fluid bed. Without going into too much technical detail of our solution, we don't need to do that. So all the feedstock prep that normally happens with a traditional gasification, that is not required for our process.
And you take all that, you put it in, and of course you've got different outputs as well, so things that come out of it. So what are the things that your process separates the waste into? Because you've got hydrogen on one side, and what else gets released or outputted, if that's the word?
Yeah, and it's a very good question, because whatever you put in will come out, in some form. And the difference with our tech is that we can extract much more of the pure molecules. So what I'm talking about here is, you imagine an organic material which consists of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. then you can have lots of different compounds and elements consisting of those. And again, our competitors suffer from TARs, so from long chain and short chain hydrocarbons that are quite sticky and difficult to deal with. So you can imagine bitumen and various other things. With our tech, then we make far fewer of those. And so we make far more pure compounds, so hydrogen, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and some lighter gases like CH4. These are all useful. And so in terms of the product that we have at the moment from our prototypes is what's known as a hydrogen-rich syngas. So it's mainly hydrogen and carbon dioxide. We then go through a separation process to separate out the hydrogen from the CO2. And there's various methods of doing that. And we're working on projects now to see which one's the most appropriate for our tech. And we separate out that CO2 and we sequester it. Then that's what makes us carbon negative, because with that biogenic material, which has captured the carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, then we're using nature's carbon capture technology, if you like, to make our fuel carbon negative. We effectively break the carbon cycle and remove that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
So if I can play it back, so the waste material goes in, there's a process, the electrolysis, and then there's a separation of the gases. So you've got the hydrogen going this way, the CO2 going that way, and then the other ones are released or also captured and sequestered, because I know you mentioned methane and carbon monoxide, which sound scary, of course, as gases, but what happens to those?
Yeah, well, the clever thing about our tech is that we can use that CO, that carbon monoxide, because it has energy in it, and we can actually use it to split water. So we can get more yield from wet biomass than there is hydrogen just in the biomass. So you imagine you've got water, which is hydrogen and oxygen, and you've got hydrocarbon compounds in the cellulose and lignin of the wood. We extract the hydrogen, all the hydrogen from the cellulose and lignin, and we can split water with the carbon monoxide that we create. So there's some serious amounts of chemistry going on inside our reactor and in terms of the gasification. And we're able to enjoy yields and efficiencies that are far in excess of anything that our competitors can do. And that's what gets all of our young grads and PhD students very excited about this tech, and it's leading edge chemistry, and that's never been done at scale, this sort of scale.
I definitely feel like I'm getting a bit of a chemistry lesson as
right.
well as talking about the startup. Let's move on just a little bit, because I've taken up a lot of your time, and I'm sorry for that. But it is fascinating. What does success look like? So looking back, fast forward 5 years, looking back on this, what is success for the business, and what are the threats to that success?
Yeah, the success for the business is where we've got a commercial demonstrator at, I say, TRL8 level. We're producing carbon negative hydrogen. That hydrogen could then be used for making energy. We could use it for making electricity. We could make carbon negative electricity, for example. If we talk, we're in talks with various gas turbine companies that are looking at using hydrogen instead of methane as a means of making electricity. And or we can put that hydrogen into the gas grid and decarbonize the gas grid to an extent, to up to the blending that we talked about earlier. And or we can look at markets in aviation as well. So sustainable aviation fuel requires hydrogen, or some of it requires hydrogen as a feedstock. And so the markets that are out there are large, and they're big and ready for this. And a lot of these technology companies that are putting billions of pounds into developing alternative ways, alternative energies to power their processes or their engines, they're desperate for clean hydrogen. And the price point of green hydrogen, that green premium that you have to pay, is too high for them to swallow. And that's where we see ourselves coming in, with a price point that's very attractive and a carbon negative product. It should then be a no-brainer for a large industrial off-taker to move from heavily polluting, cheap grey hydrogen to our hydrogen. And Tom, we've had to come up with a new color for our hydrogen. So we're greener than green. And so we call our product clear hydrogen because we're carbon negative, and when we're making it in a very clean and clear way.
Very cool. And do you think that you'll hit price parity with the gray hydrogen?
It's very dependent on the feedstock. So if we were to the economics, really, once you get a plant up and running that's at scale, the capex of that plant, which may be even hundreds of millions of pounds, fades into insignificance compared to the cost of the feedstock. And when you look at green hydrogen, then the cost of the feedstock is the electricity price. That's what you've got to pay to make your hydrogen, and that's why the price is so high. If we're getting a feedstock that's a waste stream or even a grown fuel biomass feedstock without compromising the food chain or food security in the UK, and that's a whole other story I could go into, then we're at a price point where we would get very close to grey. And that, as I say, it's about that green premium. At the moment, that green premium is 10x. We want to just make it, as low as possible. And at the moment, our current models are suggesting that we would get sub £10 a kilogram for hydrogen, even sub £5 if we're at, as I say, a waste stream where we're not having to pay for that feedstock.
So would you say that the cost of the feedstock then is probably one of the biggest threats to the success of the business in terms of ensuring that it doesn't affect the food chain or spike for global issues?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is there's plenty of feedstock out there. As I mentioned, we're not a traditional biomass to energy feedstock company. We can take those feedstocks that others are leaving behind. I'll give you a little example. So in the US, the US energy consumption is about 100 petajoules. The estimates are that there's 7,100 petajoules of biomass or agro residue from the US agricultural industry. So there's plenty of feedstock out there. And where you're looking at, and I won't name the company, but there's a large energy electricity generator, and I'm sure listeners would understand who these are in the UK, that is using biomass. They're burning biomass currently to generate electricity. And unfortunately, they're very, very hungry for that biomass. And that means that biomass market and that feedstock price has gone up and up and up over the years. But as I say, we can make hydrogen with that feedstock, but we can also make hydrogen with wet agro residue that traditional biomass to energy providers would not be able to touch, because the cost of drying that feedstock is too high, so they leave that behind.
So it's quite a competitive advantage then of being able to use that wet feedstock. Side question: I received a nice gift this Christmas of some lovely honey that was produced, I think, through the process which you take the waste through. Talk to me about that for a second.
Yeah, Tom. We were thinking about, because the previous Christmas we touched on, we gave all our investors a little jar of our first carbon negative hydrogen, which we were very proud of. And we thought, well, what can we do that's slightly different? And a lot of criticism comes our way in terms of this question of food versus fuel, and food security in particular in the UK is very important to us and the government and to farmers and to the consumers. And so the last thing we want to do is grow a fuel crop where we would be taking up valuable land that could be used to grow food. So we've spent a long time working with our partners at the Royal Agricultural University. We've got a fantastic scientist on board who's a biologist in this field. And we've looked at, okay, how can we actually contribute to the food debate? And it's not food or fuel, it's food and fuel. And one of the things, and I never thought that our business would get into this, is looking at the types of fuel crop that we could grow in the UK that would support the regeneration of our soils. And and this is something that is really passionate sort of hobby of mine that's now come into our business, which is regenerative farming and making sure that we're returning carbon to the soil, that we're keeping the soil structure, and we're keeping the micro community in that soil, which is only now is the science starting to understand what's going on inside soil. And growing a crop called herbal leys is a far better way of getting a fuel crop that's good for us and increasing biodiversity. I'll get to the honey in a second, but I wanted to explain all of that. So our model regenerative farm that we're working with, which is 400 acres, very close to our unit here in Gloucester, is growing these herbal leys. They have bees on that farm. The herbal leys require pollination, and so a nice byproduct for us with the herbal leys is honey. And we thought, well, what would our investors, what would be the last thing they'd expect to receive for the post as their Christmas present this year? And we thought, let's give them some wild hydrogen honey, where those bees have been foraging on the herbal leys that we're using to turn into hydrogen. So that's where that came from, Tom.
I mean, it's a fantastic story. I've been reading a little bit of Wendell Berry talking about, obviously, regenerative farming in the States in particular. And I met, funny enough, another startup called Flowhive, which is trying to make more beekeepers, in more urban environments. They've designed a really cool beehive of all things. So all these little dots started to connect, and I was like, oh, and then I got some honey at Christmas. This was great. So no, it's absolutely lovely. It's delicious, by the way. So thank you for that. I don't think you sell it though on the shop or on the store on the website yet. Is that something that you might branch off to doing as well, or should I just be happy with the one I got?
Yeah, I mean, as a small startup, we got to stay focused. So the honey is a nice little byproduct, and we're not producing it in mass numbers. And I really don't want the team to get distracted into us being honey producers, much as we'd love to. But we think the biggest prize is to get a carbon negative fuel out there, and that's what we're gunning for, Tom. But yeah,
fair enough. I appreciate that. Look, I really do appreciate the time. I don't know if there were any questions you might have had for us or anything that you wanted to say in closing. But it's been an absolute pleasure learning about the business, the process, talking a little bit about hydrogen in the market. So I'll hand it over to you for a second before we go. Anything you'd like to add or ask?
Yeah, I mean, it's just been great, Tom, to be able to chat this through. And we've been squirreling away down here in Gloucester, keeping our head below the parapet, getting this technology up and running and working. And so it's been a real pleasure to be able to talk through some of what we're achieving and some of our challenges and where we want to go to. And we're ready to come, out behind our bushel, if you like, and starting to shout from the rooftops about this tech. And we're super excited about it. So thank you for the opportunity to do that. And, I guess from my perspective, it would be lovely to understand if there's any parallels with some of your other companies out there where we could, work together in a collaborative way, and that's what we're starting to do. Is as I talked about, this ecosystem of partnerships is really vital, especially as we're a sort of cutting edge tech where there's not a well trodden path, and we're sort of creating our own furrow. Then every bit of help that we can get is useful. But
definitely, I'll be in touch, of course, after this. But for anybody who wants to get in touch with you or the team and learn a bit more, where should they go? What should they do?
Yeah, I mean, come to our website, which is just wildhydrogen.com. Have a look around. You can see us, what we're about. We've got a video on there, and we've got open days actually through April and May in our facility here at Gloucester, where we're going to be showcasing our technology and the prototypes and showing our plans for going forward. We've secured the site for our commercial demonstrator, which we're very proud of, which is down the road. And so, it's an opportunity for people to get involved. And as I say, we're ready to demonstrate and showcase this great tech that Mark, was the brainchild of Mark 3, 4, 5 years ago, and it's now a reality, it's becoming a commercial reality, hopefully very soon. So it's a super exciting journey that we're now ready to share with the rest of the world.
Actually, we're delighted that you're in our portfolio, of course. James, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll come back. We'll revisit this in 12 to 18 months. We'll see how the progress is going with the larger demonstrator.
Yeah.
And we'll take it from there. So until then, have a lovely rest of your week, and we shall speak soon. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Cheers, James.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.